This weekend marks a celebration of Evolution Weekend. It is an annual event that started about 8 years ago to try and get people to open the discussion between science and religion. There had been in the past an adversarial kind of relationship between science and religion, as if one were right and the other one was wrong, or vice versa, depending on which side you were on, right? But now the case is not who wins this game, science or religion, but rather in our common exploration about the life around us, how can we inform one another? What can the scientists tell us about their observations of the world? They have all the fun tools. They have all the great toys. They can make visible what could never be seen by the naked eye, right? So you have to have all the tools and you have to know how they work, and that can get quite complicated. But having that information is wonderful, not just to scientists, but to poets and to preachers. It's a great place to be now in this discussion. After 8 years, we have less of an adversarial role. We're no longer worrying about who's winning. And we're in the conversation together, and unbelievably, our language are starting to come closer and closer together. And we're starting to ask a lot of questions together. So that's what this weekend is all about. It's about that celebration of how faith and science can inform one another rather than to be adversaries to each other. So why this weekend? Anybody know? Why would this weekend be Evolutionary Weekend or Evolution Weekend? No clue? February 12th, ring a bell? Birthday of Darwin. There you go. Also Abraham Lincoln, I'm told, right? That's important too. But even better than all that, it's Eric's birthday. Don't tell him I told you. So that's why we celebrate this weekend. And Evolution Weekend is the kickoff now for our new series called Evolving Universe, Evolving Faith. This is a way to open up that conversation with scientists and people of faith. Everyday people who don't know anything about quantum physics, and people who know a great deal about quantum physics and beyond. We have Grace Wolf Chase from the Adler Planetarium, who is going to be here with us tonight to help kick off this series. She's going to be one of the Skype guests at Darkwood Brew. And she's amazing. She just has this sparkling character about it. Maybe it's because she's an astronomer and she plays with stars. I don't know. But she really is amazing, and she has all kinds of good information to tell us about the discoveries that are out there in the open space. All of that informs our conversation to say, well, what does this mean? What's implied in that? How does our world have life and meaning in the midst of all these great discoveries? Another partner in this project with us is the Clergy Letter Project. This is a group of people that got together that said that they were tired of some religions saying that evolution was a false theory and that the world was only 6,000 years old, et cetera, et cetera. And they're the ones that set up that adversarial nature between faith and religion. And they wanted other people to know that there are lots of clergy out there that can stand alongside the theory of evolution and other scientific explorations and be quite happy with that. Enter the conversation, that they're not mutually exclusive. So the Clergy Letter Project to this date has over 13,600 signatures around the world globally. Jewish rabbis, Christian and Unitarian ministers, and Buddhist clergy. They all have their own kind of letters that they sign. And it's been a really great project that has kicked off all kinds of reverberations around it, like Evolution Weekend. So these folks will also be our partners during this 6-week study during Lent. Now, when we talk about the faith side of this discussion, we often talk about the creation stories, right? That's why we started with Genesis 1. This is a creation story from a people, the Hebrew people, who are speaking out of their exile. This was written about the 6th century BC, and it was written after the Assyrians had conquered Jerusalem around 722 BC. They destroyed the temple, they exiled all the people to Babylon, and they have no idea what they're doing. They're in the midst of a very strange land, and very strange people, and they don't know which way to turn. So they're telling stories about their God, that anchor and that rock for them that helps sort the patterns out in their lives. Even though they're in a strange place, they have stories of a God who always is creating and unfolding, who is always present with that creation and loves that creation. So these stories are about a God who is constantly creating, evolving, changing things, and is present with them even in the exile. Because as the world expands, it expands far enough to include all of us and all of them. So that was a huge comfort to them in the midst of their exile. They wanted to be able to grab onto their traditions that gave them life. And that's what this story is all about. They infuse what they can see, the reality that they can point to, with the traditions and the stories that they know to be real of the breath of God in the world. Now, this is not the only creation stories of the Hebrews. As Eric was saying earlier, we have the whole second chapter of Genesis that gives us another second creation story, right? A creation story about Adam and Eve in the garden. You've all heard that one. Well, there are many creation stories globally, very diverse stories from all different cultures throughout the world. And a lot of them have many common things about them. They have a lot of diverse things. People that were living in the desert, for instance, have a very different world that they're observing and telling about than the people that live in the rainforest, right? So their ideas of creation and their imagination and their poetic verse is going to change from story to story. But many of the stories talk about humanity being formed out of clay, because clay is what a lot of primitive cultures use to make tools, to make jars and vessels, to make figurines, right? So, because it's malleable. So clay is often a common theme in some of these stories. But there's also a couple stories that I pulled out this week. There's over 500, by the way, that are documented in literature on creation stories. There's a lot of them out there. And a couple of them that I pulled out I thought were interesting, specifically because they seem to have a concept of what the scientific imagination is all about. They talk about biological things in the body. That how could they have known, right? They talk about animals becoming humans and evolving, just like we talk about it sometimes. So they're fascinating stories in that they're not, you know, common with so much their time as our time. And so I thought I'd read, I'm going to read just one of them for you today and then tell you about the other one. The first one comes from the group of the Jacare Apache group that's in the southwestern U.S. They're one of 6 Apache tribes in that area, and they're very well known for their folklore and their stories. They have books and books and books of these stories. And these folks talk about a group called the Haksin, which are supernatural beings that brought everything else into being. And the strongest of all of these Haksin is the Black Haksin. And this is his story. Black Haksin continued to make more animals and birds. The animals and birds that already existed all spoke the same language, and they held a council. They came to Black Haksin and asked for a companion. They were concerned that they would be alone. Black Haksin left them, and Black Haksin agreed to make something to keep them company. He stood facing east, and then the south, and then the west, and then the north. He had the animals bring him all sorts of materials from across the land, and he traced his outline on the ground. He then set the things that they brought him in the outline. The turquoise that they brought became veins. The red ochre became blood. The coral became skin. The white rock became bones. The Mexican opal became fingernails and teeth. The jet became the pupil, and the abalone became the white of the eyes, and the white clay became the marrow of the bones. Pollen, iron ore, and water scum were used too, and Black Haksin used a dark cloud to make hair. The intricacy of the imagination of this story with all the biological functions of the body is astounding. And it's really fun to hear these stories because it opens up your imagination and say, look at what they could see. These stories are all about matching up what they can observe in the world of the reality all around them with more intangible things like meaning and purpose. And they're asking questions about, how do I fit in? Where do I belong in this? What's my purpose in all of this? Where do we go from here? Those meanings are asked in the scientific community as well. This next story is one from the Menominee group of folks that are in northern Wisconsin, and their story is all about how their supernatural beings give the gift of humanity to animals, and so the animals receiving that gift end up coming forward and turning into humans. So it's very much like our evolution, right? So it's a common theme in some of these things that also then attribute into our storytelling through the scientific stuff. So science is very much a part of our conversation of faith, whether we admit it or not. Being able to see things in a new and different way is what science offers us. Faith offers us that very same issue, right? In fact, science tells stories very much the same way of some of these creation stories, but they use things like telescopes and microscopes, seismographs. We analyze DNA, right? We use the Hubble telescope to explore the very edges of outer space, and we have gone way beyond what anyone ever thought was possible, even just a decade ago. We have quantum physicists that are exploring the very tiniest particles of our being and trying to figure out how they relate to one another so that we can figure out what we can see in the patterns in order to be able to predict some stuff in the future and to be able to tell, if we know how things fit together, then we know how to fix them when they break, right? So there are lots of good things about the scientific exploration that goes along with who we are as being humans in the world. And this next piece is a video.
What happens to an object over here can instantly affect an object over here, and over here could be millions of miles away.
This is how it works. When two subatomic particles interact, they can become entangled. That means their spin, position, or other properties become linked through a process unknown to modern science.
If you then make a measurement of one of the particles, then that instantaneously determines what the behavior of the other particle should be. And when the experiment is done, it's found that indeed the other particle's quantum state is exactly determined once you've made a measurement of the partner particle's quantum state.
That means if a scientist observes one entangled particle and forces it to spin clockwise, the other entangled particle will immediately start spinning in the opposite direction. That seems intriguing, but it's hardly earth-shattering until you consider that the two entangled particles can be separated by billions of light years. And still, the moment you observe one particle's spin, you've dictated the other particle's spin.
That's weird, because it may suggest that information has traveled instantaneously, faster than the speed of light, from one particle to another. I don't understand it. I don't know that anyone does. Spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it.
Quantum entanglement is more than a curiosity of the microscopic world, because the effects of entangled particles can be seen and felt in our world. If scientists can overcome some fundamental obstacles, quantum entanglement could someday help humans communicate across vast distances instantly.
People sometimes think that quantum entanglement will achieve the desired goal of transferring information at a speed faster than that of light. I don't think this will be achieved because to set up these systems, you had to have brought them there at speeds slower than the speed of light. But then what do I know? 100 years ago, they didn't think that we'd be going to the moon.
What does he know? He's just a quantum physicist. How many of you understood any of that? You did, right? I mean, you kind of got the concept, right? We're talking about, not integrated, entangled particles, thank you. Entangled particles that have a relationship to one another. And the idea is that science is starting to change its language to not be the proven facts of stuff, to not be so right about everything, that everything is fact, everything is true, everything is great. But they're saying things like, I don't know how this works. It's really kind of intriguing. Or it appears that this is happening. Or this seems to be the way things are. So they're not doing this objective, proven fact thing. What they're doing is scientific measurements that observe life as they know it, right? As they can see it, as they observe it. And it's a change then in some of the language that they're using, and faith uses a lot of that same language. So it makes it really easy, I think, to have these discussions, even though we're talking about subatomic entangled particles at the microscopic level. I practiced that. We can get it because the language is becoming closer and closer together. And what I think is fascinating about this is that science is starting to look at all of what it sees in a relational manner. I mean, it's fascinating to think that a particle in one part and billions of light years away can be dictated from one another, that they're related to one another, that you can have this web that you weave here in prayer or anywhere else, and if you pull on one end of the string, something else a billion miles away is going to feel it and change because of it. That's astounding. And they're talking about the implications for quantum computing, that you can go even faster and communicate that much greater information in a much faster speed of light and all that kind of stuff that I have no idea what that means. That's astounding, but we're all related. That's astounding, right? That's the stuff that the conversation between science and faith can come together. They can converge together in their language and their observations about how life works and what's going on and where we fit into the whole thing together. In the Phoenix Affirmations, we talk about, Affirmation 10 talks about this relationship between science and religion. And essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, so you'll have to ask Eric for the exact quote. But essentially, when we talked about the different religions that were going on, when we first started this whole by way of life stuff, when we talked about Jesus in the pluralistic world, we talked about religions were people going up the same mountain from different sides and seeing things from different perspectives. That same metaphor, that same concept works with science and faith. Those issues of faith and science, both doubt and belief, says Affirmation 10, are all done in the pursuit of truth. In fact, I can quote the actual affirmation. It says, claiming the sacredness of both our minds and our hearts, recognizing that faith and science, doubt and belief, serve the pursuit of truth. That means there are no right or wrong answers. That means there is no definitive plan out there that if we could just uncover it, all would be well. It means that as things are growing and moving and expanding and changing, we are all in this conversation together. And that we can use both our heads and our hearts to talk about that. That not one side or the other wins, but rather both are needed. And in fact, beyond those two things are needed for us to come to conversation about all that is. They're not adversaries. They don't demean each other or dismiss each other. They work together. So this conversation over the next 6 weeks is going to be phenomenal. And it's going to be all done in that pursuit of truth. And when I hear that phrase, pursuit of truth, it automatically takes me to the Gospel of John. Now, it may take scientists to entangle particles, but it takes me to the Gospel of John, where Jesus is standing before Pilate, and Pilate asks him, "So you are a king?" And Jesus answers, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asks him, What is truth? Jesus answers with utter silence. It's the question of the universe. It's the question of science. It's the question of faith. It's that pregnant silence where all mysteries are wrapped up together and we meet God out in the field beyond right or wrong. And that field of the unknown, of the invisible and the visible all coming together reminds me of this quote from Stanley Kunitz that Donna Knutson brought to us this last Wednesday, which I think is fabulous and is on the stickers that you got today when you came in. So I hope that you will ponder this week, because it's much like the web that we made up here. The universe is a continuous web. Touch it at any point, and the whole web quivers. Science tells us the web exists. Faith informs us that as you touch it, it quivers. It doesn't just move, it quivers. Our exploration of truth, not the truth, but truth, it starts here. And it starts here with God. That's the next 6 weeks, and I hope you'll join us. I'll leave you with one more creation story from the New Testament, this time from St. Paul to his community at Colossae. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers, all things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Amen.